In 2019, I completed my first book online at the age of 21. A teen fiction story that I had originally started writing at the age of 16 ended up changing my life. Today, my first book has helped me to amass an online readership on Wattpad and has also helped me to build the confidence to write to the point where I'm currently in the process of completing a duology series in the genre billionaire romance. In this video, I am going to talk about how writing a book changed my life completely. If you're an aspiring writer and you've always had an imaginative mind and you always daydreamed about characters, but you never had the courage to share your story, I'm hoping that my experience in writing a book can inspire you to take action and share your story with the world. But before then, if you're new to my channel, hi, I'm 𝐓𝐈𝐌𝐄𝐒, and on this channel, I make self-development and educational content. To give a background of how I started to write my first book in the first place, I need to take you all the way back to 2014. So in the beginning of 2014, that's when I started writing my first book in teen fiction called Fool Me Twice, Shame on Me. At the time, I was a high school student trying to survive my semester. Because let me tell you, those physics and chemistry classes were a real pain. So before I even came to write my first book, I came across Wattpad when it was introduced to me by my sister. If you're not familiar with the platform Wattpad, it is the world's largest storytelling platform. So think of TV shows and movies that were diffused on Netflix, like The Kissing Booth or My Life with the Walter Boys. Before these stories became live action, they were originally stories written on Wattpad. So before I even came to write my first book on Wattpad, it's important to note that I was an avid reader of enemies to lovers trope. At the time, to make up for my non-existent love life, I was trying to read as many enemies to lovers books that I could find online. But the thing is, as I was reading different books from different authors, I felt like there were some stories that I would get super engaged in. I would really engage with the characters, be very invested in the story, but somehow the way the author ended the story didn't really satisfy me, or the way the characters ended up interacting with each other towards the end was not really something that satisfied me. So I told myself, okay, I need to write my own enemies to lovers trope so that I get to control the outcome of the story. I get to control how the characters interact with each other. And that's where my first book, Fool Me Twice, Shame on Me, comes into the picture. So when I first started writing the book, my writing sucked, right? I was new to writing. I really wasn't experienced in creative writing, but I was just experimenting and I was just writing it for fun. Fast forward to the beginning of 2017, that's where I noticed that my story started to gain traction on Wattpad and people were engaging with the story, telling me to update the book. And that was something I wasn't really used to, but it was really encouraging. However, when we fast forward to mid 2017 to the summer of 2019, between this period of time, I decided to take a long hiatus from Wattpad and I stopped updating my book due to personal reasons. And let me tell you, when I took a break from writing my book, readers would somehow find my other social media accounts to contact me and tell me to update the story. So one thing to keep in mind is that for me, when I took my hiatus, I really didn't think I was going to come back and continue the story. Even if I loved it, it's my baby, it's my first book. I honestly didn't think I would have it in me to finish the book because at the time I was going through a very dark headspace and I really didn't plan to come back. But God had a plan. And when I came to complete the story in the summer of 2019, it changed my life. I was 21 and I ended up completing my first book ever, to the point where now today I still get people reading my story on Wattpad And I sometimes read comments from readers, and they're so sweet. They're so motivational and honestly encouraging. So, how did writing a book change my life? The first thing I observed is that writing my first book ignited a desire in me to one day become a published author. So, while today I consider myself to be a writer slash author, my stories are online to read and they have yet to be published into physical copies. For as long as I can remember, since I was a teenager, I've always tried to exercise my mind to do a lot of storytelling and exercise my imagination, build characters, make them come to life. And I've always tried to determine what are stories that I think people would be interested in reading, right? But that's just it. I've built worlds and characters and stories that are online to read, but I really want to get to a point in my future career where my readers, are able to read my stories through physical copies in the physical realm, right? There's just something so fulfilling in having that idea in your mind. And I also think that creative writing changed my life because it really helped me to envision myself into a future reality where I see myself writing books as a full-time career. So that's why I am currently in the phase of completing the second part of my duology series, The Billionaire is an Ice Queen. And I'm hoping that after I complete the series, I will be, which I'm hoping will be this year. I hope that after I complete the series, I can either determine whether I want to self publish my book or go the traditional publishing route. So, the second way I noticed that writing a book changed my life is that it allowed me to see what it's like to get monetized for my creative work. So, to give a bit of a context, from 2017 to 2019, I was monetized on Wattpad for my first book, 𝐓𝐈𝐌𝐄𝐒𝐓𝐄. At the time, I believe Wattpad had this platform called or program called the Wattpad Futures Program, which allowed writers on the platform to get monetized for their books. And the way it worked is that advertisements would be inserted in online stories of writers, and the more people would engage with their book and see this advertisement, the more the authors were getting paid. Although the program ended up being inoperative, I believe, after 2019, when I was getting monetized for writing my book at the time, it was the first time I ever got to experience something like that. Before joining Wattpad, before writing my story, I never really got paid to be creative. But that changed ever since I joined Wattpad, right? And ever since I felt I had this experience of what it's like to get monetized for writing my story online, right? So that's why, like right now, the way writing a book has changed my life is that it's really encouraging me as I'm in the process of completing my duology series to really make sure that for as soon as I'm done writing the series, I want to do everything I can to make sure that I become a published author. I'm able to get a return of investment from writing books that I have dedicated years towards writing. So, another way writing a book changed my life is that it helped me to gain an international audience. So, my books online have readers that come from all around the world, from countries like Australia, Brazil, the UK, the US, India, Germany, Indonesia, the Philippines, South Korea, Japan, South Africa, Nigeria, and the list goes on and on. Honestly, never in my wildest dreams did I believe that when I first started writing my book on Wattpad in 2014, that years later I would have an international audience. It just never crossed my mind. I just thought at the time, oh, I'm just writing a story for fun and we'll see how it goes. So that's why I can't stress enough. If you're watching this and you've always wanted to be a writer or an author, you've always wanted to bring your characters to life, you've always wanted to bring events, storylines in your mind to life, but you just didn't have the courage to take action, then this is your sign. Go write that book. Go bring those characters that you've always loved to life. Share your story with the world because you never know. Your story could end up being read and loved by many people from around the world. The next way I noticed that writing a book changed my life is that it honestly helped me to improve my writing. So I still have old drafts of the first book I wrote ever. And when I look at those old drafts compared to how I write today, I am always amazed to see how much my writing improved over the years. The thing is, when I first started writing my book, it used to take me a lot of time to come up with ideas, to come up with storyline sequences and events, to just build my characters and write my chapters. To be quite honest, I think at the time when I was new to writing, it took me a month to complete a chapter. Fast forward today, it honestly takes me a week max to complete a chapter. So that just shows that by writing over the years, it really helped me to exercise my ability to write faster, to come up with ideas faster, and to plan my stories in a timely and faster way. The final way writing a book changed my life is that my first book ended up following me through pivotal moments of my adolescence. So when I wrote my first book and I was 16, it's important to note that at the time I wasn't journaling. So if you're new to my channel, one thing you to know about me is that I also love to journal on top of doing creative writing, right? But at the time when I was in my mid-teens, I didn't even know journaling was a thing. It wasn't until my late teens that I started to journal, right? So the only way I could externalize the thoughts I had as a teenager going through a lot in my adolescence was through creative writing. It allowed me, it provided me an outlet to express the thoughts I had at the time, right? So it's really fascinating. Like when I read my first book every so now and then, it's like I get into this time capsule to go back in time and see how I was thinking as a teenager through my characters. It's honestly something that I find incredibly fascinating because I get to see how throughout the years as a writer, how I went from immaturity to maturity. It's like I also grew up with my characters in a sense. And I think that's one of the things I find very fascinating as a writer is that you honestly get to travel back in time to see what you were thinking and what kind of headspace you were under as an author at the time. And by the time I completed my first book at the age of 21, not only did I grow up with my characters and they grew up with me, but my readers also grew up with my characters. They also grew up with the experiences, challenging experiences my characters went through, the character development they had to go through. And I think that is incredibly beautiful and magical that you can write a story at a moment in your life and then years later you look back and say, wow, to think this is how I used to think at the time, right? So that's why I can't stress enough, like if you have an idea of a story and you're afraid to write the story, please write the book, because even if you don't have the intention of sharing the story online or publishing your book and you're just writing it for yourself, still write your book, because it's going to allow you to see how much you have grown as a person as the years go by. You're going to go back in time and say, wow, to think I wrote this book when I was this age or that age. And it really allows you to kind of travel in back in time. And it's, to me, that's incredibly fascinating. If you made it to the end of this video, I'm glad you did. I hope that this video helped to shed some light as to how writing changed my life completely. If you want to learn more about the stories I've written, then feel free to visit my website www.𝐓𝐈𝐌𝐄𝐒.com. And on my website, you can also subscribe to my newsletter where you get self-development tips and book updates. If you're an author and you watch this video, I'd love to hear your experience as to how writing a book changed your life. I would really also love to hear your feedback. If you also want a step-by-step guide on how to grow your online readership through platforms such as Wattpad, then feel free to click on the link above, where in the video I share tips on how to do just that. It's also important to note that some of the tips I provide in the video can also be applied to writers that don't necessarily share their stories online. That's it for me. Thank you so much for watching my video, and I'll see you in the next one.